Hey, this is Mongo. I've been watching the Ruthless Aggression documentary. I just kind of want to do a review of episode one. I don't want to do a complete review of the entire episode. I'm pretty sure most people who will listen to this honestly has already seen it or would watch it. So I just want to hit some points that I really thought was interesting. Um, a good question that was asked in the documentary is how do you replace competition? Episode one was about essentially the gray area that WWE was in after WCW and went out of business and after the Attitude Era ended, and they were trying to figure out how to rebrand the company, how to reboot the company, what they should do next. And they had all this talent, and they had most of the WCW undercard. They didn't have any of the main event guys, but they had a lot of the undercard guys, and they didn't know what to do. So what they decided to do was to do the brand split. They did the brand split because they said, TV time is scarce and they have this abundance of talent. And it makes sense, even though they knew they had to sacrifice TV ratings and attendance figures and merchandise because it's an investment. You have to invest in the long term. So they knew in the long term, if they split the rosters, then you could make new stars because you have a mixture of older talent and new talent. They really wanted to do a lot of different things. But one of the interesting things that I saw was that they had trusted names because Austin was gone, Rock was gone. They started using trusted names kind of as the glue between the two rosters, and specifically they said Triple H and Undertaker because Triple H is on Raw, Undertaker is on SmackDown, and they were like the top dogs, and they were holdovers from the Attitude Era, and essentially they were the glue, the binding between making new stars and keeping, making new fans by bringing in new wrestlers and making new stars, and holding on to the existing fans who might have been fans of these guys. But of course, the Attitude Era lost a lot of talent because lost Rock and Austin, so it was a big problem. And Kurt Angle was another one of those that was among them. Kurt Angle was often bounced between Raw and SmackDown, while Undertaker is almost always on SmackDown, and Triple H is almost always on Raw. And I like that they talked about how the hunger that the company had was gone. There was no more competition, and so they were kind of competing with themselves. And in doing so, they didn't just do the brand extension to try to force competition between the brands, but they were also doing a lot of out of control, over the top creative stuff, like the Katie Vick stuff and the Billy and Chuck stuff and the Kiss My Ass Club, and they were doing all these different things, trying to take the Attitude Era to the next level. How do you continue to be edgy and hit that beloved 18 to 34 male demographic? And they found that that they could push it by doing the diva searches and the women always in the bikinis and things like that. And I think that's really interesting because that kind of the sex sells, and it always will. And they look back on it, and I think maybe this is more of a political thing, that they look back on it distastefully. I think that a lot of it, some of it was trash TV, but there's a place for having sexier women on television. There's a place for it, and WWE has made a lot of sacrifices over the years for a long-term investment. And what really has happened is, they've taken hits for it. TV ratings have gone down, attendance have gone down, and I think one of those things has been the women's issue. Not just when you don't really have lookers, let's say, on TV, and you sacrifice the models for the wrestlers. There's going to be some people who are positive and thumbs up about that, but there's going to be a lot of other people who are kind of like, I don't really care. But it's an interesting conversation to have because you can't tell people what to think or how to feel. You know, you can't tell people that, you know, it's wrong for them to really like Trish Stratus doing Playboy and not really care that Becky Lynch is on TV having good matches, or Asuka's having, you know, being a great character. I mean, some people just don't care, you know. And if you turn off a part of that audience, then those people just don't decide not to watch wrestling anymore. Okay, so now you shrunk your audience once by the brand split. Well, you shrunk your audience 3 times, because The Rock is gone, Austin is gone, the brand split has taken place, and now you have people who don't watch Raw or don't watch SmackDown or don't need to watch either one of them because the big stars are not interacting with one another. And now this will be years down the line, but now you're taking the sort of that quote unquote edge out of it. You know, you're not being edgy anymore. Now, I do think that some of the creative stuff that they were doing needed to go away. I do think that some of the lingerie pillow fights and stuff was unnecessary. A lot of the mud wrestling stuff was unnecessary. But I'm not one of those people that was really down on the Divas era. I think that the Divas era was actually a good mixture of some women that could work and could wrestle, like Victoria and Michelle McCool and Layla. And then you had your eye candy, your Kelly Kellys and those like that. And I think you kind of have to have both of them. And I think today they have a little nice mixture of models and legit mat wrestlers. And I think you got to have both. You know, just like everybody wants to have eye candy, and wrestling is a business where most of the people you see on TV are going to be guys without shirts on. You know, it's okay to want to see a woman in tights. You know, it shouldn't be a big deal. Okay, so the Ruthless Aggression Era in episode 1 was kind of like asking a bunch of questions. One of them was how do you simulate competition now that there is no other competition? So they answered that question by saying we're going to create the brand split. They said, well, how are you going to maintain an audience after you split the brands? And they decided, well, we're going to use Undertaker and Triple H kind of as bridges between the Attitude Era and this new generation, which makes sense because they kind of did the same thing with Randy Savage when the 80s ended and the 80s were kind of done. Randy Savage was the only one still around after Hogan left and Warrior left, and you know, business began to taper off. Randy Savage was still that guy, and I think Roddy Piper was there too. Yeah, so Roddy Piper and Randy Savage were still there, and they were there to kind of help the new generation guys. And Mr. Perfect came in also, and Ted DiBiase was still there a little bit. So they were there to help the Bret Harts and the Shawns get over, and you know, they didn't allow them to do a lot. Like Randy Savage was taken out of the ring. They didn't let these guys do a lot, but they did use a bridge between the Hogan era to the new generation, and they did use older guys to do it. You know, I think Ric Flair was the champion, but he wasn't. He didn't typify the Hogan era. The Hogan era was really typified by Randy Savage, and unfortunately, I think Vince did not use Randy Savage appropriately. He didn't put Randy Savage in the ring with Bret Hart or Shawn Michaels or anybody like that to get him over. He did do that with Ted DiBiase. He put Ted DiBiase in the ring with Razor Ramon, and ended up being Ted's last match. But that using people as bridges from one generation to the next, I like that idea. I think it's very clever. And using Triple H and Undertaker are two loyal guys who probably didn't mind being those. They're in a spot where they can't be moved. They're tent poles, so they can't be moved. You leave them there. You let them build guys as they go along. You know, they're the locker room leaders. They're the stars or whatever. But the third most important question was, who has Ruthless Aggression? Who is going to be their next top star? And this led into episode 2 because the answer was John Cena. And I think that the interesting thing about the John Cena episode is how much pull and how much power John Cena was able to get, because he was able to sort of clean up the Ruthless Aggression era when he got really, really over. Now I'm not going to go into John Cena right now because I just wanted to review episode 1. But I think episode 1 was pretty good. Now a lot of people was really harping on the idea of WWE had to rebrand because of the WWF, which is the World Wildlife Fund, and the lawsuit and all that type of stuff, which wasn't mentioned in the documentary. And it was I guess it was implied in the documentary that WWF rebranded, quote unquote, because they needed to, or they just wanted to separate themselves from the Attitude Era, so they had the whole "Get the F Out" campaign. But I don't really. I think that was a small part of the documentary. It wasn't really an important thing, and I think that people, it's just quote unquote smart marks trying to be unnecessarily smart, but it's not really a relevant thing, and you don't really go down the rabbit hole of lawsuits and who sued who and who won, and usually that shit doesn't really do us any good. But the truth is they did get sued by the World Wildlife Fund, and they had to change, and they ended up just changing their name. I think they could have done something else because they had been using WWF for all this time, but they had a really bad reputation, and that was another thing that where they started talking about in the Ruthless Aggression Era is they did have a really bad reputation as an organization because of the stuff they had done in the Attitude Era and the stuff that they were currently doing with like I said, with the Billy and Chuck stuff and the mud wrestling and the Kiss My Ass Club and a lot of the hijinks that they had going on. It did not make sense for them, and I think that rebranding or being forced to rebrand was probably for the best because it forced them to take a look at what the company was and then what they wanted the company to be in the future. So that was episode 1. I think it was really fun. I think it was really interesting. I'm going to do episode 2, and I think that we're going to see how much pull John Cena was able to get, and I think that was very interesting. But I think all of this is pretty interesting. So what did you guys think? Like, share, subscribe, comment, tell me what you guys thought of the show, and we'll talk to you guys later.